I was a little like confused as to why you weren't recording it. And I was like, oh, maybe he's recording it some other way. Because I know you can record on Zoom. I didn't know how to do that. I just knew it was possible.
Yeah.
So I'm like, you know what? Kevin knows what he's doing. It's fine. It's okay. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's cool.
Well, I mean, we've determined the extent to which I really do know what I'm doing, I suppose. But it'll be a secret. All right. So shall we get right into it?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yes.
All right. So this is episode 4 of Talking with the Presses, presented by Poetry London Online. I'm speaking with Arc Magazine's poetry editor, senior poetry editor, Therese Mason-Pierre. Therese, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. I'm Augur's poetry.
What did I say? Did I say Arc?
You said Arc.
Okay. You're going to take another run at this?
Okay.
Oh my God.
Okay. I was like, let me not interrupt him. Let me wait till he's finished, and then and then I'll just literally don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Okay.
All right.
So it's very hot. You're wearing black. I'm sorry. I don't know if you have AC in your house. I do not. I might have to go buy a fan after this. But
Actually, yeah. Okay, so this is episode 4 of Talking with the Presses. I'm Kevin Heslop for Poetry London Online, and I'm speaking with Augur Magazine's senior poetry editor, Therese Mason-Pierre. Thank you, Therese, for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Kevin.
So I thought we might begin by looking at the metaphor in the name Augur Magazine, because I'm quite congenially oblivious of the world around me. Very often I didn't know what an augur was before I started looking at this magazine, and it turns out, as you're aware, that an augur is someone of a sort of ecclesiastical or divine position in ancient Rome, similar to a priest, whose job it was to read the flight patterns of birds, the types of birds that it would appear, the density, the altitude at which they were flying, and thereby interpret the will of the gods and be able to make predictions about what was coming down the pike. And so I wonder if we could begin looking at the theme of the upcoming issue that you've got with Augur. If we could look at the idea of the predictive power of the kinds of text that Augur is interested in, and if not only predictive, also imagining what the multiplicity of futures towards which we can move could look like, and how that relates to Augur's central sort of impetus.
Yeah, so like you, I also did not know what an augur was until I joined the team. But it was a great learning experience. I thought it was very exciting. And so what we're looking for just across the board in terms of our vision and our mission, we're looking to find stories for the futures that we need and the futures that we think the world needs. And by that, we mainly mean sort of centering the voices of marginalized and underrepresented writers who were sort of traditionally, or like I should say historically, left out of the mainstream or left out of sort of traditional publishing venues. Canlit, as we know, is very white, but the speculative like genre is also pretty white as well. So it's not as if like the genre is like a more welcoming, more inclusive place, because you have the same sort of issues and the same sort of power struggles and things like that.
Yeah.
As was evidenced recently online. But yeah, with Augur, we want to make sure that there is a sort of a nice sort of safe place to explore for marginalized people to explore their any sort of stories that they would like to tell. And their stories will be received with the proper empathy and care that our staff, which spans a number of sort of different identities, can afford and address to those pieces. So for our issue, our upcoming issue 3.2, we're open to submissions until July 15th, so that's next week. So get those in if you can. So our theme is a multiplicity of futures. We don't often do themes like at the outset. We usually we look at what we have and we sort of create a theme around what we have, but I think this is the first time we're actively seeking a specific theme for an issue. Mm-hmm. And so we're looking for sort of softer sci-fi and sci-fi fantasy kinds of stories. We're also open to Afrofuturism and dystopia and hopepunk and solarpunk and all those things. Anything that's future focused. So we're interested in the kinds of stories that marginalize people, or the kinds of futures that marginalized peoples envision for themselves. And this can span a number of topics, of course. They don't always need to be traumatic or trauma focused and painful. They can be hopeful as well. And we would love to see any of that. But we're not looking for, of course, pandemic stories. We're quite explicit about that, actually. Like, we're in a pandemic right now. Like, it's hard. We know it's hard. We're not going to put our readers through that. So please don't send pandemic stories. But we're mainly involved really in sort of the human narratives and human connections, and character-driven stories, which sort of makes it hard to sell these kinds of stories in like the traditional genre magazines, because that's very much like, sci-fi plot, lasers, all that stuff. But we're like, hey, let's have a little slice of life. Let's have a little, dreamy and things like that. So we hope that we're going to get like a lot of really interesting pieces for this Multiplicity of Futures issue, and it makes us very excited and very happy to see what our contributors are coming up with. It's like kind of like refreshing almost.
So when you mentioned that that the impulse behind this issue is for marginalized writers to imagine for themselves the futures that they would like to see, there's something fundamentally democratic about that. And I noticed that when Augur began in September of 2017, it crowdsourced its original budget. And it did so in 8 days, which is astonishing, and demonstrates the need for Augur, or demonstrated the need then, which has since been sustained. And I think that the budget's been renewed. I was wondering if you'd say a few words about how the magazine functions in terms of how it generates income, essentially, and then how it pays its contributors.
Yeah, so when we started, we had a Kickstarter. We do our Kickstarter every 2 years. So we had the year 1 and 2 Kickstarter. We just finished our year 3 and 4 Kickstarter, I want to say in February of this year. And we successfully funded. We also get funding from the Ontario Arts Council. Whether or not that grant will still be available is up to the Ontario government. But we're applying for other grants. Carrie, our publisher, and I applied for a number of grants earlier this summer. We also receive funding from our subscription service. So it's about, I want to say, don't quote me on this, I want to say it's about $12 to $15 a year. And so you subscribe and you get the copy, the PDF of the magazine in your inbox. I've subscribed because I just want a copy, just in general. Yeah, those are our funding sources. During our Kickstarter, we have a number of sort of rewards that we give people who say donate various amounts. And we're just sort of going through our Kickstarter fulfillment at this right now, and that's been really fun. But yeah, I think those are our main sort of sources of funding at the moment, and it's been going pretty well. We also apply for grants for any other projects that we want to do. So we're thinking of doing a conference. Oh, no, we are doing a conference later this year. Whether or not it's going to be in person or online is up to COVID. But we've applied for grants for those, and any travel grants if we need to travel anywhere. Yeah, that's where we get our funding.
Amazing.
Wait, you had another question about how we pay our authors.
Incoming and outgoing, yeah.
What do you mean incoming?
Well, I mean incoming funding and outgoing funding to the contributor.
Oh yes. So so recently, Augur, I think it was late fall, winter 2019. We were approved for association. We were approved as a pro-paying market for the Science Fiction Writers of America Association.
Excellent.
The SFWA, and I think we're the only Canadian magazine that has that status. So and that's whether or not it's a pro-paying magazine depends on how much you pay your writers. So in the United States, it's 8 cents per word, but because we're in Canada and our money is different, that makes it 11 cents per word. So if you write fiction and you get accepted for fiction, and you're getting paid 11 cents per word, which I think is can be up to around like $500 something dollars, possibly more. And then poems are $60. So none of our staff is paid. We're an all volunteer staff. We all have like other full-time jobs. We have like our editor-in-chief is like in law school, just finished law school, and he's doing that. So we're really doing this from like the goodness of our heart. But you also know about this. You help with that. Yeah, we really think that this is a project and a sort of space that needs to exist. So we're putting our time and energy in that, and we don't want to take any money away from the contributors, because the point is also to give money back to these creators. So that's what we want to do.
Obviously, you're not aware of the hefty checks that Poetry London offers in the mail on a quarterly.
My goodness.
Well, I mean, payment truly is opportunity to speak with tremendous talents and the organizers of these things, which are absolutely passion projects like yourself, and also the readings and yeah, anyway, all that stuff aside, we also need money. Like a friend of mine recently said, she'd circulated a meme. She lives in Toronto, and somebody had asked her to come do a concert. This was some time ago, and said, well, we can't pay you, but there's gonna be plenty of exposure. And she says, that's actually, that works out perfectly, because my rent is 2,000 exposures per month.
Oh my God.
I'm looking forward to that. So
yeah, no, it really just depends on what you need. You got to pay your artists, like, yeah, I'm starting to become like very like selective about the places I submit my poetry to now, because of that. I mean, I live at home, so I don't really pay rent, but like it's something I keep in mind when but absolutely. I identify with the with that meme completely.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to take up too much time talking about previous episodes, but one of them was with the Thames Review, who does pay their contributors, and also Long Con Magazine, which, as a result of further crowdsourced income, like with Augur, this seems to be actually a really kind of viable way to go, as opposed to maybe being dependent upon grants. They are now able to fund the first line of chapbooks with Collusion Books, and also the first retroactively pay the contributors to the first 2 issues. So anyway, that was good news that recently came through. You mentioned Alex, who I can't imagine how he'd be going through law school at the same time as working with Augur. That's astonishing. So hats off to Alex. But also, you mentioned Carrie, and I was wondering if you could mention who else joins you on the editorial board.
Yeah, so for sure. So we'll start from we start from the top, right? I mean, we go down. No, we're a team, I swear. So Carrie is the publisher. Carrie Selyak-Byrne. They're really cool. They're a writer, also a poet. And yeah, they do a lot of work in marketing and sort of like building online communities. And Alex DePompa is our editor-in-chief. So he's just finished law school, actually. So he's working on articling right now. He's doing the bar, those tests, and he does a lot of our legal things, our contracts. We're registered a nonprofit because of him and all those things. And then we have our managing editor, Lawrence, who essentially just like make sure that like all the contributors and all the readers and all the other editors are sort of like doing their jobs and getting things that need to be done like on schedule and on time. And 3 of them also work on the website and making sure that the information is up to date and things like that. And as of now, then it's me. So the senior editor, poetry, I just do I edit all the poems. Sometimes I will edit fiction, not often, but just occasionally if I think it's really cool. And then we have Anna, who, well, it's no longer like a hierarchy anymore. It's just like it's just Anna is the managing blog editor who manages our blog. So we have a blog on our magazine that we take contributions from. We'll write either like short essays or like listicles or things like that, interviews, reviews. And then we have our comics editor, Amy, who, because we publish comics as well and sort of and illustrations. So then she does all of the art essentially for the magazine. Who do we have? We have Victoria and Vivian, who are just other editors who work on the pieces with us. We take a number of stories, usually like there'll be like one story per editor, except for me, because then I'll just do all the poems. But then everyone else gets one story, then they work on one-on-one with the authors. We recently brought on assistant editors. We have not announced this yet, but I'll just say that we have 3 assistant editors that are coming on as well. And then we have a number of readers, of first readers. We have about, I want to say we have 30 first readers that come on. They have access to Moksha, which is our submissions system that we use to get submissions. And they go in and they do like a first pass over all the pieces before they come to like a second reading. So the second reading is done by, Alex, Lawrence, and myself, just to like double check to see if, what we would like to pass on to Longlist. So that's essentially our team. The team is very big. And we as we expand the Augur network, there might be some shuffling, people might go up, move laterally, things like that. We might bring on more people, more editors. So it's very exciting. Yes.
That's tremendous. It's incredible to see how quickly and forcefully this magazine has grown. I mean, it's only been around for 2.5 years. It's almost unbelievable. So congratulations. And also, a cunning question had come to me and it's now just escaped my mind. Geez, sorry. All right, I'm gonna have to move on to the next one.
If it comes back, like for sure, like tell me. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a phrase. I should, in full disclosure for the audience, Therese and I had this conversation last week, but because, as I earlier mentioned, I'm often very oblivious to the outside world, I neglected to record that interview. So I'm aware of a term which I'm now going to ask Therese to describe, and it has to do with the context of the way in which Therese, I shouldn't, I suppose, say Therese when I'm speaking directly to you, the way in which you approach your editorial responsibilities, and that's to say the phrase is fishmouth poem. So what is a fishmouth poem?
Oh, my goodness. I'm like, you can call me Therese, what? Yeah, so this is just for me. No one else has to use this, it's just what I use. So for me, a fishmouth poem is just a poem for me that I will, it's kind of like, there's another comment where it's like, I will die on this hill. Like that's what a fishmouth poem is. It's like a poem in which, I will just give up everything if we don't publish this poem. I will walk into the ocean and you'll never see me again. So it started when, we were reading, I think it was for issue either 2.2 or 2.1, where we came upon this poem. It was called Fishmouth. It was written by Karat Dar, who's a spoken word poet, I think from Mississauga, not sure. Yes. And she wrote this poem, this beautiful poem called Fishmouth, and it was about fish coming out of the speaker's mouth as they sort of processed some traumatic event or some grief, and like it was sort of like manifested as fish coming out of the mouth. And I was like, wow, this is so cool, this is so amazing, I love this poem. And I like brought it to the pitch meeting where we do all our sort of, where we discuss the pieces that go into the magazine. And I was like, listen, you guys, this poem, okay, this is it, this is the poem, we need to publish this poem, it's amazing. And I don't know if there was any like what's the word, pushback. I don't know if there's any pushback. My brain will not let me remember it, because we ended up publishing this poem. So I was very happy about that. Got to do a lot of cool editorial work there. And so every other poem I feel matches that level of intensity. I'm calling it a fishmouth poem. So far there's like been a couple that I'm like, you know what, look, we need to accept this. Like, I don't care what your opinions are. We need to publish this poem. I will burst into flames if you don't publish this poem. But usually what happens usually is like, if I feel so strongly about a piece, other people usually feel strongly about a piece too. So I don't have to like, you know, get all my armor and fight, because they're like, well, we already love it, so we'll just publish it. So then like,
Yeah.
I don't have to have so much anxiety about it. But yeah, that's what a fishmouth poem is for me, and I use that term going forward. And yeah, it's great. Hopefully other people on the team start using it too. I'd be very happy if I can start a trend, but yeah, we'll see.
So you mentioned that that the editorial board is often sort of one mind in response to a piece that is ultimately published in Augur. And when we last spoke, you mentioned that between 1% and 2% or so of the submissions that you receive are published. And I was wondering if you identify things principally, maybe adjectives or verbs, say, that you associate with the work that you publish, and which receives the immediate consent of the editorial board.
Well, part of the pitch meeting is, it's sort of like, it's a pitch. So you have to, we have a file, like an Excel spreadsheet of all the pieces, and everyone has to go and comment and sort of highlight which pieces they want to talk about. So it's sort of like us trying to convince everybody else that we should publish this piece. And we've had times where we've had to, not really fighting, but like we've had to really like vote and go back and forth on like which pieces to accept. I have not been in many situations where I have to like really fight for a piece, especially with a poem, because I feel like a lot of like a couple of the people on staff will sort of not really defer to me, but sort of like, okay, well, this is a poem and Therese is a poet, and you know. But the pieces that we do end up accepting ultimately are pieces that I want to say are softer, and I want to distinguish between like soft and like hard. So if we're talking about like hard sci-fi or anything that's very technical, we just tend not to publish those pieces. But we focus more on the relationships between characters, or the world, the relationship between characters and the world. And it doesn't matter like how intricate or how deep those aspects are, but we really want to see the time and the care that the author has put into that piece. So it's something that we recognize. We also take pieces that are somewhat, or most of our pieces that we take are somewhat on the shorter side. We usually take one like long piece, like about 4,000 word pieces, and most of our other pieces are between like 2,000 to like 3,400 words. So you have a better chance of getting published if your story is between 2,000 and 3,400 words. But a lot of the other pieces are, we tend to take pieces that we feel are innovative, like especially with soft speculative literature. People tend to either like do rewrites or retellings of myths or fairy tales, or sort of like venturing out into new worlds kind of stories. So we see a lot of those kinds of stories. We see a lot of stories about like wolves, about witches, things like that. So we're always on our, like, not high alert, but we're always very attuned to like the standards at which we will sort of think about and evaluate these stories. So the stories of those like themes and topics that we do accept are ones that we find really innovative and really unique. And that goes for poetry as well.
Okay, so you know, when early on, before this Talking with the Presses series began, we were discussing about sort of the length of time that the conversation should go in order to make them eminently watchable, as we hope they are, in order to support these small presses and magazines. I was encouraged to shoot for between 20 and 25 minutes, and I've got a couple of more questions that I can't resist asking. So, you know,
no worries.
The audience can tune out, but I'm just going to ask Therese a couple more questions.
This is a conversation between you and me now. It's like,
yeah, exactly.
Whatever,
yeah. The audience is dismissed. Now we can just talk. So, what about fairy tales and myth lends itself to reimagination?
I feel like that's an academic question, but
well, I mean, it feels like
I can answer the question, but
okay, yeah.
Right. I think the fact that fairy tales and myths are very, like, you'll find them in like every culture.
Mhm.
I find, right? You'll find like every culture will have like their version of Cinderella, for example, or their version of like Cinderella or like Little
Creation
Mermaid or
story or something too.
different, or like creation stories as well. So there are different ways for multiple kinds of people and from multiple different backgrounds to sort of reimagine or retell their own version of that fairy tale. We received a story a while back that was an interesting retelling of Rapunzel.
Mm.
It was sort of with an African, it was an African style sort of reimagining of Rapunzel, which I was like, oh, that was great. Like we've never seen that before. So, and I feel like as long as, you know, the story has like the same beats, I feel like there's so much more you can do with it.
Mm-hmm.
We also received a retelling of the Princess and the Pea, where like the pea was something a lot more sinister. You know, it wasn't just like
Mm-hmm.
feeling the pea under the mattress. It was like that signified something like more like sort of dastardly.
Yeah.
So there are lots of different, there's a lot of space for writers to sort of explore and create in those little worlds, because if it's a fairy tale, like the audience already knows the beginning, middle, and end,
Mm.
right? So there's no anxiety there. There's no like, what's gonna happen? Like we know Cinderella gets married to the prince in the end. We know,
Right.
right? So how to get there? There's like all different ways you can sort of imagine that, and that's why we like fairy tales and myths.
Interesting. Um, the question that didn't come to me earlier, and which, as I remember it now, wasn't as cunning as I had originally thought, was
That's
basically,
fine.
it's like,
Don't sell yourself short. You know, I might find it cunning.
I mean, it's maybe of more interest to people who are also running small presses or magazines. Just in terms of mechanics, I've noticed that there's a movement afoot from, I shouldn't say necessarily a movement afoot, but Moksha is picking up pace as opposed to Submittable as the platform by which entries are submitted. I know that the Thames Review uses it, and they had some rationale for it that I can't bring readily to mind right now, but I was wondering whether that choice was intentional or whether it was just a platform that was on hand. And you know, maybe is there in any way that, I don't mean to make a plug for Moksha, they're not
No,
responsible for these large poetry
that
lending checks that I receive quarterly, but I do want to know whether there was a choice to choose Submittable or Moksha, or a movement from one to the other or anything like this.
I when we started using Moksha, I was not like in the position I am now. Like I just only recently started going to like those kinds of meetings.
Hmm.
But I believe it was just a matter of cost. Like
Okay.
I think Moksha was less expensive than Submittable. I've heard Submittable was like could get pretty expensive, like about a couple $100s.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I'm not privy to that kind of setup, but I believe that we used Moksha because it was less expensive and you could pay for it like monthly. So we're
Okay.
only use Moksha for the times that we're open for submissions for a month. We usually open for a month and we just set our dates and we pay then.
Right. So why pay for the whole year if you can just pay for individual months and open just submission windows 4 times a year? It's quarterly that you publish too, right?
No, we publish biannually, twice
Biannual.
a year, and like that's the word. Is that the word? We publish twice a year. We had originally published 3 issues a year,
Yeah.
and then when we raised our payments for contributors, we reduced our issues to 2 issues. And we just made 2 bigger issues instead of like 3 smaller issues.
Mm.
Essentially,
Okay.
yeah.
Sorry, that I should have done that research. I'm embarrassed for not knowing how many issues come out
That's
a year.
fine. No worries.
Well, okay. So I also, if the other members of the editorial board don't mind, I wanted to ask you a question about your work, Therese, because I know that tomorrow, which is to say today, because we're recording this on Thursday, and this interview will air on Friday, July 10th, which is the date that Manifest with Gap Riot Press, your new chapbook, will become available. It's officially released. So I was wondering, if you don't mind, if you could say a word about that chapbook and
Yeah.
where people can find it and all that good stuff.
Sure. So my second chapbook is called Manifest, and it's with Gap Riot Press, and it's sort of like my venturing into speculative poetry, or sort of the result of my because I've already ventured into it. The result of my venturing into speculative poetry, I became a speculative poetry editor before I started writing speculative poetry. So I thought, well, you know, this is the stuff I edit, so I might as well write it. So I started writing, you know, poems about like very like fantasy, sci-fi poems, which is what I think I'll just start calling them, because speculative is very broad. Like a lot of like sort of traditional poets have written speculative poetry, like Tracy K. Smith, who is I think the poet laureate of the States a while back. Her book Life on Mars is a little bit speculative. So yeah, so my work is, so in this chapbook is sort of like fantasy inspired and like myth inspired and sort of sci-fi inspired. There's poems about like aliens, and there's a poem about a mermaid. There's a poem about like demons and like spider people and robots and like all those sorts of things. And it's my second chapbook, so I'm not like as like nervous and like freaked out as I was with my first chapbook. But it is also like speculative poetry, and I've never done that before, so like the vulnerability comes in a different way. I was talking to Dominic Percy, and who you know, and I was like, what if people don't like it? Like, what if I publish it and people don't like it? And he's like, people will like it. Like, don't relax.
People will like it, yeah.
Yeah, because I've read some of these poems out loud at like different readings. I think I read something at Lomp, right? I read a couple of the poems at Lomp, and they were well received. So I'm like, well, and it's like, well, those are the same poems that are going in the chapbook. So what am I worried? Yeah, So yeah, so that's coming tomorrow. I didn't like realize that how time flies. Yeah, and I, as usual, you know, I still maintain some elements of like nature and romance that like I guess I write now. But and as, again, yeah. No, they're not. They're not in couplets.
Therese.
I know. You know what? Like, you know, I know. I want to re-edit them now. But,
you want to say a word about their shape?
What about, no? There's nothing. There's nothing to say about their shape. There's no form whatsoever. But yeah. So I'm really excited for that. And it was edited by Tiffany Morris, who's an Indigenous editor and writer and poet and speculative poet out of Halifax, I believe. And she's also an Augur contributor. We've published, so we've edited each other's work essentially. So I wanted to bring her on. And the cover artist, the person who did the cover art, her name is Mia Carnevale, and she was an artist who worked with the Spectatorial, which is a University of Toronto based speculative magazine that a lot of our senior Augur team came from. So I had like those contacts, and I'm really happy, and I'm really sort of excited about how it's turned out. And I guess tomorrow we will find out, you know, what people think. Yeah.
So let me make this a two-part question to conclude. So the first part would be how's your chapbook being launched, and also has, you know, the whims of COVID, has that changed in any way the way that Augur's functioned? Okay, this is going to be a three-part question. I know that when last we spoke, you also mentioned that you were thinking about, or that the Augur editorial board was thinking about coming up with a like a best of, like a publication, a physical copy of the best of the work that's been published so far with Augur. I think that you'd mentioned something like that. So yeah, launches, and is there a text forthcoming from Augur?
So the launch for Gap Riot, I believe, is going to be online. I had to go and like check the email because I received an email about it and I hadn't read it, so I have to go right now and like read the email. So yeah, it's gonna be online. And we just have a recording of our readings, and then there's gonna be a conversation. And as for we're going to do a collected volume for Augur. I don't believe it's best of. I think it's just everything in volume 2. So from 2019, all the pieces from 2019. And we're just gonna have like a physical copy that we're gonna sell in our store. And yeah, we've started doing a lot of things online, like through Zoom. We got a Zoom account, so we have all our meetings or our pitch meetings through Zoom. And we have a Slack, like the workspace app. So we do a lot of conversations there. Yeah, I mean, like it's even though this is like the one group of friends that I see like the most often. Like I see them more often than I see my partner, and it's just been like weird and interesting to interact with them that way. I can't wait to see them all in person. I'm gonna give them all a huge big hug. But yeah, it's been great. We've adapted. Yeah.
So yeah, the publishing of issue 2 is a wiser way to go. And I was thinking the way that I'd phrase that best of is if you could go through issues and like privilege some poems over others. It implies a kind of sense of competition or like a gradient of quality that I don't think I actually necessarily hold to. So I just wanted to make an amendment that I don't know if you could make a best of in the poems, but issue 2.
Oh, well, I mean, I'm sure you could, maybe if like we had like 30, 40 issues, like maybe we could make a best of.
Yeah.
But we're on like volume 3 right now, so maybe not.
Fair enough. And
We
we're
love
looking
all our
forward
poems.
to the next volume, to which I want to encourage the audience to submit by this coming Wednesday, the 15th. This has been episode 4 of Talking with the Presses, with the senior poetry editor of Augur magazine, Therese Mason-Pierre. Therese, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin. Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. Take care.